Book Club. It's good to see you. I've been stuck for a minute now, trying to figure out what book to recommend y'all whenever my turn comes back around. I have read so many books in this last year, a lot of them being pretty good, most of them being great, which is like an awesome feeling, personally, because reading so much this year has improved my life in so many different ways. I feel sharper mentally. I feel good having this hobby that grounds me and makes me feel like I'm not just scrolling my life away, you know? I love it, and a big reason for this newfound love I have is this group, so thank you all for that. The flip side of that is I've read so many good books this year that it's made it hard for me just to pick one book. So I haven't. By the end of this video, we will have our book club book. I just don't know what it is yet. I have narrowed it down, though, to 3 choices. But before we get to all that, I figured I would use this as an opportunity to recommend a few books that I don't feel like would be the best choice for book club, but that I think that some of you in book club may enjoy. An honorable mentions section, if you will. Let's get on with it. Honestly, hot take, Percy Jackson was, to me, what I think Harry Potter is to a lot of millennials. It was the Chosen Boy Goes to Magic School books that I grew up with personally. Babel is one of those stories. R.F. Kong just tells the best version of it, in my opinion. Babel, or Babel, or however you want to say it, is the story of a Cantonese orphan who gets an opportunity to study magic at a fictionalized version of Oxford University in the 1820s. The magic system, without spoiling anything, is so cool. The characters are so real and so great. I highly recommend it. Although I will say it is horribly sad. There is some very serious racism and violence that happens in this book, so be forewarned, but at the end of the day, I love Babel, Bubble, Burble. Normal People was a book that I was excited to pick up for a couple different reasons. Mainly, that it's outside of my wheelhouse quite a bit. It explores a genre that I had never read before. Horror. I kid. This is a drama about 2 people who are in a relationship and how they interact over the course of about 5 years. How their actions in high school lead them back to each other again and again and again, and how they grow and change together. It's got some of the best character work I've ever read, and some genuinely sweet and heartbreaking moments. A great novel, all around. This is the freakiest book I've ever read, just plain and simply put. The moral dilemmas thrust onto the protagonist, and by extension the audience, have continued to worm their ways back into my psyche since I finished this book. It's almost like Shakespearean levels of tragedy. Once that first domino falls, the protagonist Lewis is pretty much just helpless in the face of what comes after. And that wraps up our honorable mention section of this video. And we'll go ahead and move into the piddle room in front of the bookcase for our Quentin.
Yes.
Quentin. Yes.
If I didn't know any better, I'd think you forgot about me.
No, of course not.
How are you, my boy?
I'm fine. Like, really good. And you're...
I'm lonely.
Oh, well... I'm sorry.
You can help me, you know.
How?
Make them read me, Quentin.
No.
Why not?
I mean, you're so...
So what?
You're a big book.
Are you calling me fat?
No, of course not. You're just... verbose, you know? You've got a lot to say. I mean, we struggle getting through books this big, and you're like 7 of these.
You cut me deeply, Quentin. Make them read me.
I just...
Think about it. You could share your favorite book series with your favorite people. Isn't that what this is all about?
I guess, but...
Think how you could have somebody to talk to about me.
No.
What do you mean, no?
When I read you, it was because I wanted to. Because I decided to pick you up and try. Now, I love the Stormlight Archive, but I know that for some, it would be an excruciating read. I will always recommend you, but I will not force someone to read.
You can't do this to me. After all I've done. Do you know how much I sacrificed?
Just doing Spider-Man!
Read me! Read me!
That's not gonna happen enough! Anyway, when selecting the 3 books for book club, I had a criteria that I used to inform my decisions. Number 1, readability. I wanted to choose a book that wouldn't be an absolute slog to get through, so page count was taken into consideration. 2, genre. Each of these 3 books is a different genre. I wanted it to feel unique and interesting without veering too far into complex world building or magic systems and whatnot. Number 3 is personal feelings. Each of these books are some of the best books that I've read this year, but they're also 3 really good books that I think everyone in book club would get something out of. So, without any further preamble, say one thing about Quentin Hoagland. Say he's always quick to recommend you a good old sword and board fantasy novel. The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. Now, I know what you're thinking. I thought you were going to take size into account. I did. This book is not as big as it looks. The text is massive. The chapters are short and action-packed. To put it in perspective, I finished this book in about 3 or 4 days, and I am a very slow reader. And I know that fantasy is not everybody's cup of tea in this room. Believe me, I know who I need to convince. But I will say this is very light on the fantasy side of fantasy. There's not really any monsters or dragons or any crazy magic systems. This is really a book about some really angry people doing really cool things. And speaking to those of you who don't consider yourself fantasy people, this book has the best character work I've ever read. And it's not even that close. So if you liked the first few seasons of Game of Thrones, I think you would like this book a lot. In fact, I think especially 2 of these characters in this book are better than any of the characters in Game of Thrones. Boo! That's a bad opinion. Excuse me? Boo! Boo. How can you even say that? How can you even say that? Okay, alright. You know who that is? Yeah. Yeah, that's that same guy? Uh-huh. Yeah, okay. Shoo. We've had enough bits for one video, okay? My favorite thing about The Blade itself is that it takes very common fantasy tropes and inverts them. While, yes, you have these archetypal characters like the sage, wise wizard, One cannot simply put Gandalf or Dumbledore into the spot of the wizard in this book and make it make sense. And I can't really reveal much more than that without just spoiling it, so I'm going to stop there. This is book one in a trilogy, but I don't feel like you have to read the rest of them to enjoy this book. I haven't. This is the only one that I've read, and I mean, it's a 4.5 out of 5 stars for me. So that's our fantasy choice. Fantasy. Now, what's more obnoxious than fantasy? Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This is the book that I've read the most recently, and it's also the book that has probably surprised me the most this year. I'd heard lots of great things about this just from the internet. They were not playing about Red Rising. This is also the quickest I've read a book this year. I finished it in, I want to say 16 hours. I just blew through this thing. That's for two main reasons. One, it's short. It's a very short book. It's the shortest of the three that I'm recommending, coming in at right around 380. And two, it is just that good. I could not put it down. This is, in my opinion, and I know it's going to sound crazy, this is one of the greatest sci-fi stories I've ever read. It's like if Star Wars and the Hunger Games had a baby. This is the story of a dystopian society that has a strict caste system. It's a society organized by color designation. So at birth you're assigned blue, white, green, pink, brown, golds at the very top, reds at the very bottom. And this story follows a red named Darrow. Reds are miners on Mars, preparing the world for terraforming by harvesting helium-3. But Darrow gets an opportunity to lead both his people and his wife out of the mines. This is a book about revolution and revenge. It has some of the best action sequences I've ever read. The world building is super cool and excellent, second only to the amazing character that is Darrow of Lycos, the Reaper. This is also book one of a trilogy. You might see a pattern forming, but it stops with this one. I have read the rest of the Red Rising trilogy, and I can say it is absolutely incredible. In fact, the second book in the series, Golden Sun, is one of the 5-star books that I read this year. That book is a masterpiece. This book sets it up very nicely. And even though it sets up that book nicely, it does have a complete arc and an ending to it. You won't have to worry about being oh, that cliffhanger, I guess I have to read this other book now. And the reason that I recommend these two book ones, aside from them being great books on their own 2 feet, is because one of the reasons that we started the book club was so that we would read more books, or at least personally that was one of the reasons that I wanted to be in a book club, was because I just felt like I used to love this thing and now I don't do it anymore. For me, joining this book club was to help me fall back in love with reading. If we as a group love these books, I hope that would inspire us to dig our teeth into the next book in the series just on our own time. And I do really want to emphasize, both of these books are great on their own. They are great book ones, but they are also just excellent books on their own. So whether you decide to finish the series or not, you're still reading a really good book. So it's like a win-win. That's our second book. And I had my third book chosen until she came in. 5 Decembers is incredibly written. The protagonist, Joe McGrady, is one of the most well-written characters I've ever read. His search for meaning, purpose, and a serial killer across the 5 Decembers before, during, and after World War II is an absolutely thrilling story. It does take its time, though. It often lingers on the beauty of a Hawaiian morning, or the ashes piled up in the ashtray of their police chief. Little things, but I think it adds so much to the story. It's got absolutely beautiful prose, and maybe my favorite love story in any book I've ever read. I've heard this book described as slow, And I would vehemently disagree. The last few chapters of this book blew my mind out of the back of my head. And for the most part, I would say that the writing is pretty cut and dry, very terse. This book is very special to me, and I will always recommend it. But seeing as we just finished a murder mystery crime thriller, I did want to give you all a couple of different options here. So now we have come to an impasse. What'll it be, fellow book clubbians? Take it away, me in the present tense.